Hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to My Best Sales Mistake. This is the show where we dive into not only the success stories behind the leading voices in sales and marketing, but also the mistakes that they made along the way, what they learned from them, and how it helped them get to where they are today. Now, I'm incredibly excited because today our guest is Belal, and Belal has truly done it all. He's been in AE. He's been a VP. He's an advisor to countless companies on go to market strategy. And he is also the inventor of two of my favorite things in sales. That would be the mic drop method for cold calling.
Yes.
Boom.
Yes.
And of course, the movement for sellers, by sellers, death to fluff. Bilal, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's an honor. You made my day with that one. Yes. Thank you, Mo. I appreciate it. That's high honors. We got to lower the bar a little bit. The bar's just it got raised a little too high. I'm a fan of
I'm
lower
just
bars.
I'm just telling you what I know. It's just the truth. So Bilal, tell me a little bit, like in your own words. You've done so much. You've had so many different experiences. Like, how would you talk a little bit about kind of your background? What are some of the things that you like to highlight, that really stood out to you kind of along your way?
Well, I got very fortunate that I've just been in startups the whole time. So the first company I joined was a startup that was selling to startups, and I was like, "Hey, this is great. Let's do more of this." And I just stayed in it since. And it's not easy picking the right startup because there's so many unknowns behind the curtains, behind the scenes that you just, no matter how much interviewing you do and how much talking you do, you won't know until you join. So I've had some duds, but I've been fortunate that I had more successes than bad ones, and I think that's just luck. I can't even chalk it up to like something I did. It's just I picked a couple winners without really realizing it or knowing it. Um, yeah.
That's awesome. I think one of my favorite things about like just you in general, but especially your LinkedIn profile, is your blatant honesty. You're just like, some of these are like done.
Yeah. I mean, if you see me at like 6 months at a company, you get. I mean, how much did I really accomplish in 6 months? I onboarded for like the first two, then I like left by the next four. It's like not a lot happened. Not a lot
That's
happened.
great. That's great. Well, but the good thing is, I think one of the themes we'll talk about today is those are probably some good learning experiences, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, it's like you bond most with people through like issues and adversity than you would on easy street. So the people that I was with on those sinking ships are like lifelong friends now versus some of the other ones.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, like, one of the things that I think I also really love about like the death to fluff movement is I think, and you could talk a little bit about what sort of brought it about. But the way I understand it, is that you just noticed that there's quite a bit of advice on LinkedIn that maybe wasn't so good, or wasn't, or something that you may have disagreed with. So I'm curious, as you kind of think back, like even before you sort of made that connection, um, what were some of the misconceptions that you had when you started selling?
Oh, dude, I went through Sandler's as my first training, and for every bit of good it gave me an equal amount of bad. I got to be
Okay.
candid. It gave me good and bad, but just some of the stuff that they taught me here was, um, I mean, just the pushiness that it taught me. It gave me just the complete wrong mentality when I was approaching things. Uh, it made everything seem so one sided and in my control, which I was like, it doesn't feel like I'm in control. Like like when I hang up the phone, I mean, like it all sounded good in my head, and then the outcomes don't happen. And I think that's also because there's a culture in sales of winning. Winning is
Mm,
not a culture, it's an outcome. It's not a culture. Because then what happens when you lose? Then you don't have culture? Like it's done? Like culture has to be based on like morals and principles and like things like that that guide you. And but sales literally believes it's religion and culture is winning. And it's like,
mm.
well, then what happens when you don't?
which is usually in a good scenario about 70% of the time, and about a bad scenario probably about 85% of the time.
Right.
So to your point, and we can get into whether or not those win rates should be the way they are. There are probably some things that folks need to be doing differently. But to your point, you're going to lose more than you're going to win. And so if your entire culture is predicated on just a small number of wins, what is that leaving you when you're struggling, especially in a situation like today?
Totally, totally. And it's I dub it the sales bro thing. I know that means different things to different people, but for me, when I think of sales bro, is like that kind of like hardcore win, work hard, party hard, that kind of stuff. Let's grind it out. And it's just like, but that's not what the elite sellers are doing. Like
Yeah.
that's just not what they're doing. They're not grinding. I don't see them grinding.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about what they are doing. What are you seeing out there for them? Because I know that when I first got into sales, I definitely, and I'll actually even pause. I'll say before I even got into sales, as folks will learn probably if they've been on the show, is that I actually did my entire career in consulting before I
Mm.
picked up a bag for the first time about three
Okay.
and a half years ago. And when I was in consulting, my concept was kind of along the bro culture, maybe a little less grinding, but more like, hey, the best sellers have these amazing personal networks. They take everybody out to play golf. They take everybody out to dinner. They have the gift of gab. So I'm
Mm.
kind of curious, like, did you have a similar misconception as you were going along early on in your career?
100%. 100%. And I followed that. I followed that blueprint to complete terrible failure, to the extent that I was almost fired from my first job that I actually wanted and I liked it because I was doing so bad. And a manager from my team, Bill Callahan, gotta give him a shout out. He's the reason why I'm here now. He pulled me aside and he's like, "Dude, you are gone in like 3 weeks' time unless you do some dramatic changes. So what I want you to do is every day I'm going to stay after my job ends, my hours end, and I will sit with you and we will work through these things." And he did. And when I watched him cold calling and doing all this stuff, it was the opposite of what they told me. He was blunt with people. He would be rude back. He'd snap back at people. I was like, "What? You can do that? Like you can snap back?" I thought the customer was always right and all this other nonsense. He was just so picky with what he wanted to do. I was like, "Aren't you supposed to call the list?" He's like, "Why would I do that? Why would I waste my time just calling the list? I got to pick the best ones." I'm like, "What? Hold up, man. This is like everything was different." That like I spent probably about 5 nights with him where he really sat down and I turned it around. I was like, "Okay, I'm going to play by my own rules. I tried your way. You guys almost fired me trying the way you told me to do. Time to just go off the reserve because I might as well. What do I have to lose at this point? If it doesn't work out, I'm right back where I started from. I lose the job and I got to figure out something else."
Oh my God, Bill! Nice job, Bill.
I know, I know, I know. He's a legend. He's a legend.
I mean,
True.
it's if you think back along your career, there are just a few people that make this huge difference, that take the time to
Yeah.
provide the coaching and the mentoring. I'm
Yeah.
curious if you think back to when it sort of started to turn for you. Um, what was it like when you're actually on the cold call? What did you feel that was different from what they were telling you to do, and then when it started to work for you, like what did you sort of see in the customer reaction that started to make you go, "Oh, this is different"?
It was confidence. I just felt like I don't care. The opposite of what I was doing before that was I was trying to pretend like I cared. How are you doing? And this sort of stuff, and like this disingenuous interest in the other person that I didn't have because you were literally didn't exist to me all of 20 seconds ago before your name appeared on the list to call. And 20 seconds after we hang up, I will move on to the next person on the list and you will be out of my mind.
Hmm.
So why am I pretending like I care? This isn't a care thing. And that's when I got away from this. You have to sell value and you have to help and you have to want to do all these nice things and be sincere. It's like it's not sincere. This is a cold call. This is about as selfish as it gets. I'm calling a random person to talk to them about something I care about that they don't want to hear about or didn't ask about in the middle of their day. That's about as selfish as it gets. So accept it, embrace it, and be good at it. Then do this phony stuff where you're like, "Oh, I'm super helpful." Like, no, you're not. You're cold calling people. that's that's you. Nobody's asking you to do that.
And if you were wondering why it's called the mic drop method, well, there you go, right there. Boom, drop the mic. I mean, you don't hear that brutal honesty often enough, I think, in sales today. And that's awesome. So, what were some of the elements that you sort of changed about what you were saying to folks? Like, rather than niceties and kind of leading with value, what were some of the things that Bill taught you that you shifted in how you're approaching your cold calls?
Yeah, it's a great question. He just told me it's all about them. He made me realize it's all about them, and what he did that stood out to me as I analyzed the call, because I was locked in, right? Like I didn't take it as a joke. I said, okay, this guy is going out of his way, to push off dinner and stay late just to help me with no other, just out of the kindness of his heart. So let me analyze what he's doing and get serious here. And the one thing that stood out that he did every time the call ended up in a successful outcome, whether that was like a quality follow up or a meeting or some sort of valuable piece of information that helped them decide whether to move forward with that account or not, was that he got them talking early and often. It just stood out every time. It was like, how, and I kept trying to analyze what is that transition point where he goes from hello and he's, in the spotlight, to then all of a sudden they're talking, and all of a sudden he's not talking anymore, and it's all of a sudden like they are running the conversation, which is brilliant, and he's just reacting to what they're doing now, and he's no longer feeling the pressure, because our initial pitch was this like, pain menu. You've seen these sort of like scripts where it's like, oh, we talk to people like you that sometimes have to deal with, and it's like four different bullet points, and by the time you got to the fourth one, like, does this are you still there? Like, that's probably been at least a minute of me just reading this thing. And I doubt you even remember what I started with or who I am. He didn't do that. He just didn't do that.
It's all about them. What a novel concept.
I know, right? I know. But at the time, as a junior rep that didn't know better, that went through Sandler's, I was like, what? I thought we were just supposed to hit him with the pitch because it was refined by XYZ and taught by 1, 2, 3, so it's got to be right.
Right. Yeah, no. There might be a couple pitfalls with a very process based structure without like thinking about what some of the content behind it are. Well, let's fast forward a little bit because I think that there's definitely a challenge out there today with market access. I don't know if you'd agree with me, but that we see that in general access is down and leads are down, and so there's definitely an outbound piece of this. I'm curious if you also have a perspective and maybe a story of kind of when we do get somebody into an opportunity and we start to think about when we're moving from that early stage qualification to really getting some interest and some advocacy for someone. And I'm seeing a lot of sales leaders today being concerned about win rate. They're realizing, hey, we do have some opportunities. We might not have a huge amount of opportunities, but my real concern is that my sellers today might be wasting some of those opportunities. Either they're not showing up sufficiently prepared, or they're not showing up with whatever it is that drives interest to get somebody to realize that this is something that they should do and maybe even must do today. So I'm curious, as you think back through kind of your background and history, were there some moments where maybe you ran into some challenges moving people through, and some of the things that you learned from kind of driving that early stage interest?
Oh, totally. So, little context. When Bill taught me how to be an SDR, I became the number one, and I never looked back. Stayed number one every month after that till they promoted me. Then I went into an AE role and bombed again. It was like the whole cycle renewed, and I got very little training on how to close. And all of a sudden, there was all the rest of that sales cycle. I was like, I have no clue how to do the rest of this. And unfortunately, my manager gave me like almost zero support, almost zero. So it was just like a whole new frontier. And one of the things that I did really wrong that I can look back on now, and I think anybody who's sold at a high level realizes this idea that you have an opportunity and it's something to lose. You never had anything to begin with. You didn't lose anything. There was never an opportunity there to begin with. You can call it that, You could put that in the CRM and create the little record and trick your mind and psych yourself out into thinking, I've got a chance. But if you were looking at it properly, you never had a chance. There was never a buy. The only opportunities you have are with buyers. But most of the stuff in a CRM are prospects. Those aren't buyers. Buyers are
Mm.
very small number. Most of them are leads and prospects. And so you do this mental gymnastics of convincing yourself that you have an opportunity and it's there to lose. And it's like, no, you can't lose something you never had. you know, and once that clicked, I was like, oh my God. And that again came from because in my regional office that I was in, there was two really elite sellers. And one of them took an interest in me, and I really like kind of pledged my loyalty, my oath to their tutelage. I'm like, I will even split my deals with you if you teach me how to sell because I'm not figuring it out on my own. And luckily they took me under their wing. That guy was Michael Haas. And because of Michael, I learned how to sell properly. And I saw that mentality in him. He'd walk out of a meeting and I'm like, that was great. And he'd be like, that's stupid. I'm not calling them again. I'm like, what? I'm like, but that's an opportunity. He's like, no, it's not. And I was like, man, I fundamentally don't understand what this word opportunity means. Every time Michael talks about it, he has a different set of criteria that he's operating under than I do. And his mentality is completely different to mine. No wonder his results are so much better than mine.
I mean, how often do we see, especially young sellers, focused on, I just need to get to the next meeting? If I keep talking to them, eventually they'll buy. And yet it sounds like what Micah was doing was completely different. Micah was going through some type of a mental checklist of things that he was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to take a wild guess. I'm going to guess it probably wasn't BANT. I'm guessing it probably wasn't something as simple as a qualification checklist. So I'm curious, kind of, what were some of the things that you noticed that he looked for that were different indicators of serious buying intent?
So the thing that he did differently than me was if you looked at me at that time, I was doing all the work while my buyer wasn't. And if you looked at him, his buyers were doing all the work and he wasn't. So like he was sitting on, I really mean this. Like, people say sales is a hard job and you have to do hard work. It's true. I'm not saying that's not true. But I'm telling you right now, elite sellers get their buyers to put in equal or potentially even more effort in their deals than they themselves put in. They do. If you watch them at any level, whether it's an SMB, mid-market, enterprise rep, at any level, their buyers are putting in their shift in the process. And that was the difference. Like I was running like a fool, just creating these reports and creating these proposals and generating these results and putting in all these things and scheduling this stuff. He did none of that. I mean, to get a proposal out of Michael was like pulling teeth. He didn't want to do it. His mentality was, I don't want to make the proposal. Mine was like, I'd love to make the proposal. I'd love to. It's like the greatest part of my day is I run back to the office, sit in front of the laptop, and generate the proposal. Michael's like, screw that. He just never wanted to do it. And that was the difference until they were ready to buy. And then you could see him like a lightning bolt to make that proposal. He was faster than me. I was like, whoa, where'd that speed come from? Because he understood the proposal isn't something you do unless they're ready for it, and they got to show you that they're ready for it. It was just, again, it was like night and day. What I was doing, what he was doing, the effort that I was putting in and the results I was getting, the effort he was putting in and the results he was getting.
I mean, it's kind of one of those things where you think, well, if I put the proposal in front of them, then they have something to buy. And yet, if I put the proposal in front of them, and this is, I think, something that I learned from the same mistake, way before they're ready to see it, what you're really doing is opening yourself up to a ton of potential objections, concerns, misconceptions. I think one of the things that I find to be interesting is in larger enterprise sales, rarely is budget, in my opinion, fully earmarked for what a change initiative is going to take. Mm. And so that's where I kind of make the joke about BANT is, you can't say like it costs $250,000 and then they're like, oh yeah, I just happen to have that earmarked.
Yeah, got it right here,
Whereas, you
next to
know,
my desk.
right there. Because what have we not done? We haven't sized the problem yet. And there might be a ton of different opinions as to either what the problem is or how big it is. And then of course that leads to how should we solve it, and how much money should we dedicate to it. So if we're so willing to put a large number in front of somebody beforehand, they might just dismiss it outright. Whereas what I'm guessing Michael did is, had the time and the wherewithal to build the problem together, to ask for their counterpart to do the work, to either mobilize the people inside the organization, to start to figure it out, to socialize what the issues were. And all of a sudden, we have a much clearer perspective around what we're solving and how big of a problem we're solving, in order to be able to then share a number that makes sense to solve it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. Raymond asked the question here, and actually, hey, what's up, Corey? I just saw your message. What's up, Will? What's up, people? I'm just seeing the things coming in here. I wasn't checking on, but Raymond asked a really good question. Is like, how do you know when they're ready? And what I realized was this, Raymond, when I was watching Michael do it, and I've adopted it since, and it has never failed me. There are three things you need in order to have a buyer. If you're missing one of these three things, you do not have a buyer. I don't know what you have, but it's not a buyer. I can tell you that. The three things you need is they need to be problem aware. That's number one. They need to have a problem, and they need to be aware of that problem. Not you're aware of their problem. They are aware of their problem. Number two, that there's a clear impact in addressing that problem. Not ROI, not value props. I'm talking about impact, meaning fixing this does this for me. If I fix this leak, then my water bill goes down, right? Like that's a clear impact. They need, in their words, what is the impact of addressing that problem? And the third one, this is the one that sellers miss, that I used to miss, that Michael taught me, was a willingness to change. You can have people with problems and they can have a clear impact in addressing that problem, but it's not a priority, or they don't feel like addressing it right now, or it's too much of a burden, or they're nervous about making the wrong decision, or you can keep going on and on and on. That willingness to change is the third and final piece of the puzzle. And what Michael would do is he would stress test people's willingness to change. All right, are you willing to change? So we've identified the problem. We've identified that you clearly have an incentive to fix it, but are you willing to do it? And here, what he would do is he would make them gather a bunch of documents to prove that they have the willingness to change, like excruciatingly annoying documents to gather. And guess what? A lot of people didn't. And he's like, but that just proves that they don't really want to do it. Because if they did, they would go out of their way to make it happen. And sure enough, we'd have people come back 3 months later, 6 months later with the documents like, hey, I'm ready now. It's like, wow, magically, they found all the things that we needed in order to generate for them the proposal. And that's what I'm saying. He didn't do the work. I was the one fact finding all the stuff to make the proposal for my buyers, while he was having his buyers do all the work so that he can generate it for them. Huge difference. And that was a willingness to change. Ever since then, every company I worked for, I had some step in the sales process, something that they had to do the work. And if they didn't do it, I was like, hey, no problem, no judgment, but you're not a buyer. That's cool. Let me know when you are. I'm here.
And I love that, because what you are is you're detaching yourself from the outcome. You cannot force somebody to buy. There's no, and that's I think where my misconception of like it's just like you have this silver tongue. And I told this on the last episode, but it's so funny that I kind of want to retell it. Like I honestly believed, and I know this is kind of ridiculous now that I've spent a few years in seat, that closing was like some Mad Men style meeting where like the seller got up in front of like the conference
Yeah.
room and gave this just amazing speech, and then everybody practically stood up, clapped, hugged, and said, where do we sign? And it's just like that's not like how people buy. All right, so Michael has a question. Well, all right, what are some of the downsides to Sandler in your opinion?
It's been like a decade and a half since I did Sandler, so I couldn't comment to how it is now. I'm sure it's been updated a lot curriculum wise. At the time, it wasn't what, as a new seller, I needed to learn. It just skipped a lot of the stuff at that time that I needed, which is like universal buyer's journey, basic understanding of psychology, how do people come to decisions, the things that make people, why is choice hard? Why is changing off the status quo hard? Things like that weren't really covered in Sandler's. It was more just like tips and tricks of how to do sales tactics, which are fine and well in context to knowing that stuff. If you don't know that stuff, it really doesn't get you far.
Yeah. And I promise we did not plant Michael. That was just, I think, off of some of the earlier comments. So Bilal, I think one of the things that might be going through the heads of folks is, you kind of mentioned that Michael would hold back proposals. But what that doesn't necessarily get you around is when people ask for pricing early on, and trying to kind of balance that, the need to still be able to do sufficient discovery to make a prescriptive, proposal versus feeling like you're giving the buyer what they need. And I've heard you offer some of this advice before, and I really appreciate it. So I'm kind of curious, like, what some of your thoughts are if you're early on, maybe first, second call, and they ask you for pricing. What is kind of a way that you like to address that?
Well, I mean, I would say that why are you getting asked about pricing? You should have already mentioned it. Why, like, take it like, okay, there's no such thing as a professional buyer. You don't go to school for it. You don't get certified for it. You don't go through training for it. I mean, unless maybe you're like a procurement person at a really large company that we're talking about, like a couple dozen people globally that might match that description. There's no professional buyer. There should be professional sellers. Last time I checked, this is a profession. You do get trained on it. You actually can now go to school for it. Like, it is a full thing. So who's the burden on? Is the burden on the person that's haphazardly buying for the first time this day, week, month, year? Or is it the person that literally does this day in and day out with people just like them? Who's the burden on? The burden's on the seller, not the buyer. So if you're going to be the professional seller, bring it. Bring into the context of the conversation what needs to happen to buy. And it's interesting that like Matt Dixon's Jolt effect really backs this up now about how elite sellers, actually their talk time is actually pretty even or sometimes greater than their buyers. And they actually do forceful recommendations at different points in the sales process and so on. And it makes sense to me, after all the behavior I saw of elite sellers, that they do that. They don't play around. So I want to tell people pricing because if they don't have that kind of money and it is beyond them to even get it, wouldn't that be great to know early? Then before you're 4 meetings deep or 3 meetings deep with them, and then they go, by the way, I can't approve that money. You're like, what? Well, who can? Oh, it's so and so. Well, how do we get them? Oh, they're on vacation. What are we doing? What are we doing? So bring pricing. Now, do it intelligently. So there are ways to do it. It's like, for example, in the case of pricing, I don't want to ruin the chance of a much bigger deal if the potential is there in an early conversation when I still don't know much. So I might tell people, well, look, our pricing starts at 10,000 a year. So there's no scenario on the planet where you're paying less than that. 10,000 is where it starts. And typically for a company like yours, I've seen it go from 50 up to 95,000. There's about 4 factors that go into that. I can explain those factors to you, but before I do, let me pause. I threw out some numbers. What's your initial reaction? And all of a sudden, I've taken control of the pricing conversation. I'm waiting for them to ask me. Because if somebody really wants to buy, don't they need to know the price in order to do so? You imagine going to a store and walking out without ever seeing the price? It would never happen. So again, if you know that they need to buy, there's certain things that they got to know. They got to know competition. They got to know pricing. They got to know implementation. They got to know product shortcomings. Who would buy without knowing some semblance of those things?
I love that. I love that so much because you're giving them what they need to be able to show up and make a decision, but you're also not limiting yourself early on in the conversation, by being, either overly prescriptive or giving them too many options. I saw a question come in from Yanis here, and or Yanis. And so the willingness to change literally comes from their action, and not from their mouths. I love that. It's a question, so I'm going to kind of pose that question to you. But
Yes.
I think that's an excellent summary.
That's pretty much it. Every company I've been at, we could pick any startup on my profile, and I could tell you the step that I made my buyers do, at least one step, if not multiple, that they had to do. For example, at Full Story, I'd make them invite at least 3 team members and do at least 2 integrations. If they didn't turn on 2 integrations and invite 3 team members, I'm like, what are we doing? If you're a serious buyer, you would check out the tool properly and do that. At Clearbit, I'd make them send me data. I'd be like, I don't do the demos off our dummy account. I do the demos off your data. So if you would like to do the full demo, I would need you to send me beforehand at least 1,000 accounts of yours. And guess what? There's a bunch of people that never did. They'd say they would, then they never did it. And I'm like, that's fine, but at least I knew. If you can't pull 1,000 accounts, you're definitely not going to buy the product. Like there's no scenario where that works out. So every company I've been at, there's at least one step that I made them do, if not multiple, in the sales process to show me, are we serious? Are you willing to do this? Because if you're not willing to do it, that's totally okay. No judgment, but please don't waste my time. I got other things to do.
And what's great about that is you're not wasting your time on opportunities that aren't real, but for the ones that are real, you're creating a much better experience. You're actually showing what the tool can do, or you're showing how it can apply to their world in a much more personalized manner.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I put my shift in when they send me their data to make sure that I gave them the best custom demo possible. But if they're not going to at least meet me by doing the fact finding mission of finding their data, what are we doing? Why would I go through the whole song and dance of a demo with somebody that can't even pull a list for me?
Oh, that's fantastic. I actually would love to get your take on this. This is something that I've been using recently, given just, we're in a tough environment and things are shifting constantly. Like I'll give you an idea. I was having some conversations with people in the financial services industry, which shifted very much from March 1st to March 31st because what happened? SVB and
Yeah,
signature and all of that kind of
yeah.
stuff happened in
Base
between.
collapse.
So one of the things that I've been doing to kind of pressure test when folks tell me like, hey, look, and totally understandable. Again, we cannot force people to buy, nor would I ever want to. And it makes sense to me that their perception of their ability to make a decision March 1st completely changed by March 31st. But what I've been doing when they say like, hey, let's revisit this in May, or let's revisit this in 2 or 3 months is saying, great. But in order to do that, let's let's think about all the things that need to happen and let me do work with you ahead of that. And what I found to be really interesting is with me offering to do additional work, me offering to do something, completely free, if you will, but in the spirit of helping them along what they say their ultimate goal is, you find out real quick how serious they are because there's that reciprocity effect and people do not want to take you up on something that you're going to be doing if they're not serious. And what that allowed me to do is know very early on whether I should just disqualify those opportunities or whether they're serious about the time frame they're speaking to. i'm
Absolutely.
curious i'm curious kind of your take on that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there have been times where, I'll bait the proposal to people big. Would you like me to generate it? And I'll tell them it's a bit of work for me, just so you're aware. So if I generate it, I need at least a response from you, minimum, because it's going to take me some time. And I tell them how long it takes me to do it. Just see the response. But actually hold off on that, Bilal. We're not ready yet, actually. So I think that's fine. Thanks for offering that because they tell you, right? Because they feel bad because they're like, oh, I'm gonna make him do work. He's gonna be upset with me because he's expecting something back if he does it. Preface that, and you're right. You mentioned what this underlying psychology is. It's the law of reciprocity. If somebody holds the door open for me, it's rude of me to not say thank you. I owe them that, right? So we're kind of ingrained in this in our general lives. It's happening all around us at all different times. So then use that to your advantage in the sales process, and the same effect. I'm going to hold the door open for you. You're going to say thank you. No, no, I'm not ready to say thank you to you. Okay, I'm not going to hold the door. Right? I'm not going to do that. Cool, but I'm glad we're in agreement. That's fine. And like I said, like bad sellers, which I was in the beginning, they shy away from the danger, and elite sellers run to it. Literally run towards the danger of the deal. How is this deal not going to happen? They run to that. That's why they're fine talking about pricing. That's why they're fine talking about how much work the proposal is. That's why they're fine putting some effort onto their buyer. They're running to that danger. They're finding ways to blow the deal up. And they're saying, are you gonna shy away from this, or are you gonna step up into it?
Because if we step in up into it, there's a chance we might be able to address The underground grenade that we don't quite see happening,
Yeah,
if we can
yeah.
help uncover it. So two questions here that kind of I think are along the same line. One from Anastasia that says like, how do you find this pain point that you can help with? And then Michael also, what is your process for helping prospects identify their problems?
Yeah, well, I mean, identifying problems, well, partly it should be from your current customer base. Why? Why do they do what they do? Whenever I meet a new startup, I go through like five very basic questions with them every time. Doesn't matter what startup it is, and this you can use this as a seller because it's the same process that I do, which is, what happens if your product doesn't exist? What do people do? Why is that a problem? If your product still didn't exist and they wanted to not have that problem, what else could they do? Why doesn't that work? And finally, why do people choose your product? They can answer those questions. I can pretty much figure out everything I need to do as a seller to sell their product without ever seeing it, without ever logging in, without knowing all the little nitty gritty details of it. I could already sell it just with those five questions answered because I know problem, status quo, alternatives outside of their product, and then why their product gets chosen. That's good. That's enough. That's enough information to have a good conversation because buyers typically follow a pattern. And when that pattern is disrupted, so they typically, this is sort of the beat that they follow. And I've noticed elite sellers, when their buyer veers off the pattern, off the path, they get really annoyed. Why? No, normally what happens is at this stage, you'd bring in person X. At this stage, we'd be doing this. At this stage, you'd be delivering back to me this. That's not happening now. Why? Because when people buy from me, this is how it usually goes. Small deviations, fine. Big deviations from the pattern, red flag. Why?
Enablement and onboarding teams, right there. If you want to get effective onboarding into folks, Bilal just gave you the list, and it's a lot more effective list than maybe going into all the bells and whistles on our products, right? It's like how often our onboarding's training us on our customers, their problems and their status quo. And I love the call out of what are the alternatives, because there's kind of two things. One is obviously the status quo. They can stick with the devil they know. They know, might be stuck together with duct tape and all these other issues, but they've learned to live with it. And the other is, what are some of the other paths they could take that might be, less expensive, less risky? And it's important to call that out. Manuel had a question, and I like this one. When they're getting pushback on involving their economic buyer, and so they're saying they don't want to get that economic buyer involved in the process yet, and they say that that can maybe jeopardize their evaluation. So I'm curious, sort of those gatekeeping situations, if you've run across some of those, and what are some of your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, I mean, that means you don't have a champion, you have an influencer. So that's the difference. And again, that's another hard lesson that I learned, which is, somebody could just be an influencer. There's somebody that has a voice, but not enough. The difference between a champion and an influencer is an influencer can behave just like a champion in a deal. Be excited for it, talk to you about it, let you know the problems of the company, all that good stuff. But only the champion gets you access to power. An influencer can't. An influencer knows where the power is, but can't get you access to it. That's what makes them an influencer, not a champion. The champion will get you a seat at the table with the person that makes the call. That's the difference. So at that point, you say, well, if you can't get so and so, there must be a middle step here where we involve person X who can get us so and so. Let's bring them in right now and let's get them caught up to speed on where we are. That's your champion. Now you switch. You go, okay, I've designated this person I've been working with so far as the influencer. Now I know they're not my champion. That's fine. Can they get me a champion that will get me to power? If they can't, then again, well, I don't know what you're doing. You're not. It's. I'll tell you what's going to happen. You're not going to close that deal. Like that's what's going to happen. You'll
I
probably get
love that.
ghosted too because they'll feel bad telling you because nobody wants to
Right.
say, oh, by the way, I couldn't get this done. How are you doing today?
Oops, my bad. I totally misrepresented the influence I had in the organization. Yeah, no, I don't get too often. I don't get the emails with that honesty too often. Yeah, and I think this goes back to a lot of what we were talking about earlier, which is it really comes down to my buyer's actions, not their words. You can use the terms like champion influencer. Some of the research that Challenger has behind it, which is obviously something I strongly believe in, is mobilizer and talker. And so, if you guys want to go a little bit deeper on that, DM me and I can give you some content. There's some great webinars, but it really goes into mobilizers in our world, which can also be a great synonym for champion. Take clear actions where they bring in other folks
Mm-hmm.
proactively. They
Mm-hmm.
think through what those objections are. They
Mm-hmm.
identify who's going to support and who's going to maybe be against, and start to think about what are some of the arguments, because this in the end is a battle of ideas, right? It's
It
like,
is.
what is our problem and what is the solution to that problem? And so I think that's fantastic. And to your point, if folks are really gatekeeping that hard, they better be able to give you a very good reason and an alternative path, or you should start thinking about disqualifying that deal. Cool. Well, I think we have a time for a couple more questions, if you're still good. um, let's see here. um, Mark says, have you ever quoted a price much higher than you normally would because the buyer had budget for it?
Totally. Why not? There's a again, another hard lesson learned. In the early days when I was selling, I was, what I thought in my head, very fair with pricing. And what I found was people took that fairness and discounted it as like insincere. And I was like, well, this is really weird. I'm doing the opposite. I'm being forthright. And by being forthright, you're actually bothered by it. And somebody kind of got me on this idea. I forget who it was in my career, maybe one of my managers later in my career, of a cheap diamond. Say I came to you with a diamond and it is all the right things, high clarity, high quality, all this good stuff. It's a nice number of carats. And I go to you and like, hey, it's only $100. You'd be like, a diamond of this quality should not be $100. It should be $10,000. Why on earth is it so much less than it should be? There must be something wrong with it. Deals like this don't happen. So when you're talking to somebody and they have a big budget and you give them this no-brainer lowball offer, and then they're actually gonna be like, that doesn't make sense. That's not what I'm doing. That's not the price category I want to be in. Right? I'm looking at first class and business class, and you're talking coach. I don't want to be in coach, even though you're giving them a first class seat at coach price. Doesn't matter. There's something wrong with it. First class doesn't cost coach. It shouldn't. So what's going on? So there's some psychology behind actually charging, and that's why you anchor high, and then you go down. So absolutely, I'll quote skyrocket prices sometimes just to get the conversation started, get them to get a reaction, and then be like, so, and where do you think it should land? And now we can start talking about it.
And that's the power of the range that you're talking about, right? It's the ability to provide a range and provide some of the levers that either they can pull or think about, that would help them land in that range. And
Mm-hmm.
and I think one of the things you're talking about is just that cognitive dissonance. Like, these things need to make sense in the buyer's brain. Otherwise, you're potentially creating doubt, at a moment. And we kind of go back to Matt Dixon's latest research, the Jolt effect, and it's all about how do we manage and reduce the uncertainty from our buyer in making the correct decision going forward. We certainly don't want to be the ones that are increasing it. So one of the things I love to ask Bilal, kind of shifting it a little bit, is like, if you think back on kind of either a deal that was funny or memorable, was there a moment where you just look back and you may have won it, you may have lost it, but it's just like you just crack up because it was just like, man, that was just, it was just a funny deal. Something that kind of went weird on me.
Whenever, yeah, whenever anybody asks me this, there's this one prospect in my head. We'll call him Dave for the sake of simplicity. And we met this guy like 3 times. Like, we broke bread with this guy. Like, we ate at the dinner table with him, took him out. He seemed like a buyer too. And Michael was with me at that time. So I would like trust Michael's instinct too. Both of us thought we had a real buyer. And the manner in which this man ghosted us, like we never knew him, was so intense. It like scarred me. I was like, how could he pretend like we're not there? It just completely ignored us after like meeting with us like for weeks and stuff like that. And I remember like almost a year later, he came back to us like nothing happened. It was just like, hey guys, how's it going? And we're like, excuse you? Like, how can you possibly walk in here and just pretend like nothing happened? We literally took you out to eat like 3 times, man. Like, how could you have possibly blown us off that hard and then come back like it's no big deal? I always think of him and I'm like, man, oh, that guy was like crazy. That guy maybe had some split personality because I was like, you don't do that. You don't do that to people.
I mean, that's some serious like I don't want to get too armchair psychologist, but that's like some sociopathic
Yeah, that was the
behavior
joke
right
we had.
there.
We're like, some people are crazy, man. Some people want to watch the world burn. What can you do?
Nah. I mean, it's funny because like it actually reminds me of one of the very first deals I was working, and it
Mhm.
happened right when COVID hit.
Oh,
And so it was one of those situations where there was so much shifting that we said, hey, just given the uncertainty, if you're willing to partner with us and go forward, then we're going to give you a great deal. It's like we understand that you're stepping up to the plate in a moment when you could just back off and like, oh yeah, and they're like fully committed. We'll get this done. Have a date in mind. This was March 31st, 2020. So it's Q1, one of these classic, we're gonna finish it up. And to your point, just ghosted. Didn't
mm,
answer, didn't say anything, didn't say, hey guys, something changed, whatever. And I was getting towards the end of Q2. And by the way, folks, this is a great thing to do at this time of year is if you had a situation like that, I just said, hey, send him a note. I'm just curious, like what happened? Like, I just got to know because, my sales manager at the time had said like, Jeff, some people just don't care. They
yeah.
just, they don't care about you. They don't care about your situation. Cause I was just offended. To your point, I'm like, you just don't do that.
You just don't do that.
You
There's
just don't do
limits.
that. Like, at
There's
least send me a
limits.
note to say, like, hey, just, it's not happening. No big deal. We all walk away. And to your point, he came back and was like, oh, yeah, hey, can I still get that deal? And I'm like, no, you can't get that deal, but I'll give you some deal. We'll work on something.
Yeah.
And what was crazy is we went through the whole discussion and then again started to ghost on me. Now, this is where I think what's important is multi-threading. Luckily, this was not the end buyer. This was somebody who was in a situation in between. And what I ended up doing was actually reaching out to the end buyer and I said, hey, like, you really want this for these reasons. This is like the cost of inaction. These are the business case items we've built. We are not hearing back from this other entity. If there's something in the way of us working together, please let us know because we're very much excited to work with you. And bam, 2 days later, had the contract signed, deal closed, and they are still a customer 3 years later.
Mm,
Um, and if I left it up to this person who may have sociopathic tendencies, I don't know, it never would have gotten done. And
yeah.
they wouldn't have gotten the change they wanted, and my ultimate end buyer. So to your point, it's like it is important to be able to multi-thread and move and have the opportunity and frankly be blunt when it comes time. It was like, guys, you already we went through one ghosting, we're going through a second. Like, are we going to do this or are we not going to do this?
Yeah. Yeah. You gotta have limits. You gotta have limits. That's the thing. They tell you to be nice. They tell you to be helpful. They tell you to deliver value. It's all good and well, but all within limits.
So Bilal, I'm curious, is there any other items that you're kind of noticing out there in the world today that you have some thoughts on before I kind of head off to our get you out of here question?
I think the biggest thing that I see sellers facing right now, and I was also dealing with it just recently at GTM Buddy, my last company I was at, which is just how many stakeholders are now involved in every deal. It's
Hmm.
become ridiculous. I mean, we were selling deals at GTM Buddy that were like 20, 25, 30, 40K, and we'd have like 6 stakeholders involved. I'm like, how does it take 6 people to make a 30K decision? I'm like, the time that all 6 of you spent is probably worth more than the 30K deal. Candidly,
Yeah.
candidly, like I don't even understand it. And I think there's just at this day and age where people just don't want to. And it wasn't like that even. I can say when I started off in sales, it was not like that just 10 years ago. 10, 15 years ago, it was not 6 people in a room to make a 30K decision. Did not happen that way. So whatever, societal shifts have occurred or whatever, we can diagnose that later. But there's clearly too many people involved in decisions. So I would just give you advice right now for those listening: be very intentional and who you involve in the deal. Like, take that by the reins again. Who's the burden on? The burden's on you as the seller, not the buyer. Don't let the buyer steer that. Don't let the buyer decide who gets involved. Be very clear to them. You want to minimize the number of people involved. You want to keep it to the essential group. How do you differentiate between people that need to hear about it versus people that need to be involved to make the decision? Those are two different categories. Yeah, they might need to be aware that we're having this conversation, but we don't need their input. The people's input that we need to make the decision might only be two or three people, and then the rest are all peripheral. So how do you get very intentional about explaining to people when we involve too many people, this grinds to a halt? And you don't want that, and I don't want that. So how do we become very intentional about involving only selective few? Because as soon as you let go of the reins on that and you let the buyer do it, you're in the third call, the second demo, third call, and all of a sudden there's like, you see the invite list and it keeps growing. There's like 6 people on the invite list. You're like, why would 6 people need to see this demo? Who are these people? Like, nothing I can do. Talk about setting yourself for a scenario where you fail. When you have like 3 different departments represented on a meeting, there's nothing you can do as a seller to manage that meeting, because no matter what you say, one group is going to check out. At least, right? If you talk to group X, group Y doesn't care. If you talk to group Y, Z doesn't care. If you talk to Z, X doesn't care. No matter what you do, you cannot manage that audience because it's just too many competing interests and opinions.
I mean, that's
So,
it, right? They literally can have competing interests or KPIs that may be in direct conflict. That is some
yeah.
of the challenges that we see.
And you're not their
So
business therapist to like help them work through that. You're a seller. You don't got time to like deal with people's issues, internal conflict, and politics. Like, what? I got a job to do. I can't do your jobs for you.
I
So,
love that. And I'll just go back to kind of like the third shout out to the Jolt effect. And it's just like it talks about, you know, judging the indecision. So we need, to your point, figure out, okay, so what is the decision that we need to make around, say, a demo? And then who are the folks who are involved, and limiting the exploration. Because to your point, if we start to get into second, third demos where we're not, answering a specific problem, we're just opening ourselves up. And if you have a serious buyer, they want this change. It's up to you as the seller to be able to coach them on potentially shooting themselves in the foot just to be nice and include other areas. They might be opening themselves up to having their initiative get squashed.
exactly.
All right, Bilal, this has been awesome. I can't thank you enough. I'm going to get you out of here on this question. Um, I love art. I love music. I love all these live events. So the question to you is like, what is the one live like artistic event? So again, music, comedy, theater, sports, anything that you would suggest that someone go out and experience?
Ooh, that's a great question. Um, a great live event that people should experience. I
And it can be any sort of artistic thing. It can be visiting any monument, anything that you might consider bucket list stuff that you've either done or are thinking about doing, that you would say, hey, other folks should experience this.
I
They
mean,
might
I
not
feel
know.
like people should really learn ancient history a bit more. When I went through school, it's like it was just like Dark Ages, Renaissance, American Civil War. Like, that's all that happened in the world, right? You're like, nothing happened in China,
That
nothing
was
happened in
it.
India, nothing happened in Middle East. It was like Greece, Rome, Dark Ages, Renaissance, Civil War. It was like, that's it. Like, that's the history of the world. Like, that's not what happened at all. There's like a lot of other stuff happened in a lot of other places that's pretty incredible and crazy. And as I learn more and more about, so like I love going to museums about that kind of stuff. I like watching shows about that kind of stuff. I like learning about ancient warfare and tactics and how they did it. People of olden times were like, I'd argue, ahead of us in so many things. It's kind of crazy what they were able to accomplish with like a fraction of what we have today. So if you're going to experience something, I'd go to like um, something that's outside of your comfort zone a bit, and try to go to like a museum that talks about a culture that maybe you're not as familiar with, and be pleasantly surprised what you're going to learn.
I love that. That is sage advice, folks. Get out of your comfort zone. Uh, it was not a single through line straight to the Civil War. There were a lot of things happening out in the rest of the world.
Sure.
Let's stop doing so much U.S. naval gazing and maybe learn about some things that other folks have already experienced. Well,
Uh,
Bilal, thank you so much for coming on and joining me today. You've been a breadth of knowledge. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, my friend.
my
Any
honor.
last words? Where can folks connect with you? I think they've already figured it out given your follower count, but
Yeah,
where's
LinkedIn, of course. I got the newsletter, deathtofluff.substack.com. You can check out. That's going to be launching soon. And yeah, so there's a few announcements coming through that. But yeah, those are the two places. It's my honor. Thank you for having me, Jeff. I appreciate it, man.
cheers, my brother. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining us for my best sales mistake. We'll be taking a break next week, but we'll be back with you in July. So take care, all, and thank you again.